was such a great gift to hear. This is a genetic deletion, not a genetic defect. Because once you call someone defective, once you talk about a birth defect, you're likening a human to an item on a factory line. I mean, it's a very post-industrial revolution way of thinking about a human person. We're humans, we're not machines, and we're not mistakes.
Hi friends, I'm Amy Julia Becker, and this is Love is Stronger Than Fear, a podcast about pursuing hope and healing in the midst of personal pain and social division. In this season, we are talking about all things healing. Personal healing, spiritual healing, social healing. We'll explore the role of faith and medicine in healing, the intersection of mind, body, and spirit, the way our personal experience of healing is wrapped up in our participation in a wider work of social healing. We'll talk about how healing fits into conversations about disability and so much more. On that last point, today's episode is my conversation with Heather Lanier, author of the beautiful memoir, Raising a Rare Girl. I do get a chance in our conversation to gush a little bit about how excellent I think this book is, but I want to say it again right here at the top before we even dive into the conversation. Heather is a beautiful writer with really important things to say, and she does all of that through honest, relatable stories about her life as a young mother and wife and a person of uncertain faith who's learning about love and disability and vulnerability and what it means to live a meaningful life. I'm so glad you're here, and I'm so glad you'll get to hear from her today. I am so excited to be here today with Heather Lanier. She is the author of Raising a Rare Girl, which I had the chance to read this summer, and it is definitely my favorite book of the summer, and probably longer than that. So I just want to highly recommend those of you who are readers out there, you want to find Raising a Rare Girl. So Heather, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks so much, Amy Julia, for having me.
I'm so excited to talk with you. And I have had a little chance, I feel like, to get to know you, even though we've never met in person, because I got to read your book. But that is not true, obviously, for most of the people who are listening in. So I just want to start by asking you to share the outline of your story, and then we'll dig into some of the details.
Yeah, sure. As I start in the book talking about, I got pregnant in my early 30s, and really did all the things that the pregnancy culture tells you to do to try to make what I call a super baby. You know, I got kind of swept up in this sense that I had to avoid all mercury at all costs, of course, and always microwave my lunch meats and things like that. So it was sorry, there was a ding. So I got very swept up in making what I call the super baby. My daughter was born really tiny, and we didn't know why, and it was unexpected. And her name is Fiona, and she was 4 pounds 12 ounces, which I later learned is just it's 4 ounces shy of what they consider a normal span. So it's like if a baby's under 5 pounds, they are concerned. The doctors and midwives and nurses were concerned. And 3 months later, we learned that she has a doctor looks at her and says, okay, there's enough markers here to indicate that maybe there is a genetic syndrome or an explanation for her tininess, she struggled eating. And we eventually learned she had something called Wolff-Hirschhorn syndrome, which is incredibly rare, 1 in 50,000 births. It occurs in that instance. And it's a genetic deletion. So on the short arm of the 4th chromosome, each chromosome has a short arm and a long arm. Her short arm of the 4th chromosome has a little kind of spot that other people have that she doesn't, and that that explains a lot of different things about her. So we had a lot of unknowns in those early years, and a lot of that is what I write about in the book. All navigating all the unknowns. Most parents have certain expectations for their kids about abilities to do certain things, like chewing, chewing food and walking and talking, and all of that was thrown into question. So kids with Wolff-Hirschhorn syndrome, half of them do walk, half of them don't. Half of them, less than half actually do talk. So it was just a lot. There were a lot of uncertainties. yeah, and then as in the course of that year, while we were learning about Fiona and learning more about her diagnosis and really sitting with all those questions, I got to then sit with all the expectations I had about her life, what I thought her life would be, what I thought a meaningful life was, and how that all got kind of flipped upside down in what I consider a really good way, So there's some of the story.
Absolutely. And amen. I wrote a memoir now, actually almost 10 years ago. And the subtitle of it is Faith, Expectations, and a Little Girl Named Penny, because of having such a similar sense of, I didn't use the words creating a super baby, but yes, I'm going to do this right, and I'm going to follow every rule, and there are charts and graphs, and I know how to do that, and like get a good grade on the test
yes
and all of these things. And then I'm given a child who is essentially going to make me aware of expectations I didn't even know I had. Like I didn't know I expected her, as you just said, to chew and walk and talk. Like I just did. And then once I became aware of those expectations, to, again, in a good way, call into question all of them, especially the value that I placed on her humanity in relation to those expectations, which thankfully has changed significantly since she was. But we'll get to talk about more of that in a minute. I wanted to just pause and ask you two other things. Like, one, can you tell us, just give a little bit of background on you, not outside of being Fiona's mom, but at the same time, you are a fully realized human being, and you have passions and interests outside of motherhood. And that comes through in the book as well, in this, I think, kind of subtext of what does it mean to be a female and a mother and a thinker and a worker, all of those things. So fill us in a little bit about who you are in that way.
Yeah, I'm a writer. Now I work as a professor of creative writing in New Jersey. While I was parenting for a number of the years of like the early years of parenting, I was adjuncting. So I was working part-time while the kids were in the preschool hours, like squeezing class times into those like little 3-hour bits. Looking back, I'm amazed that I was trying to juggle all of that.
And then I couldn't believe what you were like. You have one scene where you're like pumping milk and also trying to be interviewed for a position with like this board table of men, and it's like, oh my gosh, this just
yes. We did attempt to. We attempted to nurse her in a Harold's Chicken Shack in Chicago. Fiona was like 7 or 8 months, and she was also starting to she had her first seizure, which we knew it was likely for kids with Wolff-Hirschhorn syndrome. And then I had to try to nurse this baby who was feverish and was starting to really not want to nurse anymore. In a Harold's Chicken Shack, which is a greasy place, and a delicious greasy place for a nursing session. And then I had to rush off in a black suit to an interview. So I was trying to maintain it. I mean, I've always been a teacher since I graduated college. I started teaching in Baltimore City, and then studied creative writing and poetry and creative nonfiction at Ohio State, and then always loved teaching. I loved teaching people how to write, how to tell their stories, and I liked to write about my own life too. So I was always kind of writing while parenting, even if it was just journaling, trying to figure out a way to make sense of this life.
Yeah, I hear you on that. And your skills as a writer come through. It's not, your story is beautiful and interesting. Your thoughts are interesting, but you also actually but you have a wonderful way with words that just makes the book all the more compelling. So the other thing I wanted to ask, just as kind of background, is if you could just give us a sense of who Fiona is now, and what makes her beautiful and lovely to you, and what challenges she faces as her own particular human.
Fiona is currently in a season of no way. That's a phrase that she's saying a lot. So I say, it's time for lunch. No way. It's time to do this. No way. And
that like, is she saying, no, I don't want to, or like, whoa, no way? Like
she's saying, yeah, that's a good question. Right now it's reading as no, I don't want to. I'll have to listen to see. It's not like I'm so excited, but it's like, it's deadpan. It's a deadpan joke she delivers. No way. I'm not doing it. And just now I said, Fiona, stop disagreeing. And she said, I'm not disagreeing. So, that's where we are right now. She's great. She's 10, which is wild. Yeah, I know. Books take a long time.
I know. Penny was 5 when my book came out in the
Yeah.
her infancy. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. She's 10. If you met her, you would perceive her as probably much younger because she's smaller. She's just designed to be small, as I write about in the book. She's very verbal now. She's very mobile. She runs now, all of which is great, but also not contingent on like it being a great life. So we're grateful for it, but we would. Yeah, it's just a part of who she is. And she's going to move into 5th grade. So that's all just pretty mind boggling.
Yes, absolutely. Well, there's so much more we could say just on that, but I want to move into some of the thinking that I think you express in the book. And so there's lots that I underlined and starred and put exclamation points by, but one of my very favorite, if not my favorite quotation from your book is, when you push away vulnerability, you push away your humanity. And what I was thinking about is the ways in which your life, which I think aligns with my life in many ways, pre-Fiona, taught you not to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
And then how you've come to see vulnerability as like so essential to being human.
Yeah, that's such a good question. It's hard to capture in a podcast answer. I'll do my best. I think that I just had this like just achiever mindset, and even now, I mean, I was just like scrolling through Instagram today, and like a favorite person that I follow was sending this message like, never give up, don't give up, never give up. And I think about that message like in relationship to, say, like Simone Biles, who I'm so glad was like, this is not the right time for me to be competing. That I think that we're being more generous with ourselves culturally in general about when we know where our limits are, and that there are limits to being human, that there are barriers. Our bodies fail us. We get diagnoses, and none of that means that we're bad or wrong. And it's actually just a part of being human. And it's such an important part, I think, of being human, because it teaches us so much. It's also just inescapable. So I think with Fiona, I had done sort of everything I could to make a baby who wouldn't experience the precarity, like the very thing that life is like the thing I was trying to like not give her, which is a paradox. Like the pregnant woman who's like gestating a life and is like, I will make the life of an armored fortress of immortality. It's not possible. And so then, when Fiona was this child who was tiny and worrying, and she didn't have any major diagnoses right away. But people were concerned. She clearly was not the robust baby that like the doctors would be comfortable with. The doctors would have probably congratulated me for, because they didn't. Some of them didn't. There was a sense of like, this is concerning. What did you do? And I wrote about in the book. A nurse said like, did you do drugs? Well, did you take drugs while you were pregnant? Which was such a face slap. That's after especially all the things I had done. I think for me, I just came really close. I just got really intimate with the truth that we cannot escape this sense of precarity, this sense of fragility, and that there's something there to really move closer to. And I do think that disability is a way of accessing that truth.
Well, and just that whole idea of vulnerability, I think the root word is the ability to be wounded. And yet that sense of, if I'm open enough to be wounded, I'm also open enough to be loved. And that's, to me, I mean, similarly with Penny, I came face to face with vulnerability, not just in her, but in myself, in a way that I had ignored or denied or been able to shield for much of my adolescent and adult life. And on the one hand, that was really scary, and it meant confronting hurts and pains and, precarity in a way that I didn't want to have to. But I do think it also was that, peeling back the armor means there's, at least theoretically, there can be a lot of freedom and joy and promise and possibility in that space. And I think that's what you also write about really beautifully. Sure, this is scary stuff, but there's also a possibility of opening your heart to a whole new way of
Yeah.
being, not just
Yeah.
your daughter, but the world.
Yeah. Well, it
And
gives
that,
me this, it's this
yeah, go ahead.
feeling of like, it's this feeling of like, oh, this is what I'm meant for. I don't mean like I'm meant to be Fiona's mother, or I mean, we are meant to both be, have the possibility to be wounded and the great opportunity to love. Like that's actually, I think, what we're meant for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And to care for each other in our woundedness too. I mean, that's part
Yeah.
of there's this hyper independence that I think is related to the ability to not be vulnerable. It's like, I can just protect myself.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
vulnerability actually can open up love, because we have to care for each other in our woundedness, or even just in our limitations, like the things that
Yes.
we can't do because we're humans and we can't do it all.
Yeah. Yeah.
I want to go back to just what you were saying about the doctors would have said congratulations with a different
Mm,
baby, right?
mm,
And you, I think, do a great job of just speaking to the way in which language frames reality and the narrative that the medical establishment was giving you. And actually, there were two different ones the different therapists were giving you. The different you have these. One example was having a resident who talked about Fiona having a genetic deletion rather than
mhm.
a genetic defect. And that was a really big difference. So this is, you write, this was that moment when he said that. I think it was a man who said that.
Yeah.
This is when I first experienced disability as a flexible reality, bent and twisted by our notions of the body and by our assumptions about which bodies are worthy of life. And I just loved the idea of disability as a flexible reality. That has certainly been my experience as well. But I'd love to have you just speak to that a little bit. What do you
Sure.
mean by flexible reality, and how has that realization played out over the course of Fiona's life and your life as her mom?
Yeah, well, I write too, and that's a moment where we met with a geneticist. The first time we met with a geneticist, he was kind of giving us the official face-to-face understanding of what Wolf-Hirschhorn syndrome meant. And his delivery of that syndrome to me was much more fluid and possible, rather than compared to like what some other parents of kids with the same syndrome heard. So some of them heard this. The doctors gave them very definitive and negative portraits of who their children would become. It was like,
Mm-hmm.
this child will never do X, Y, Z. And it was also the sense of like, also there was a lot of focus on what the child can do and how that can or will be able to do, and what that means for their life. Like they won't be able to do this, and therefore it'll be very difficult for you.
Yeah.
And so that is a certain kind of reality that's like it's a portrait. It's a frame around the future that parent then has to live with, the sense of, the medical profession, the person who's telling me about my child is describing a future that is closed down and tragic.
Right.
And so I'm so grateful to any diagnosing doctor who can give people possibility, who can give people neutrality in language too, that like, in this case, yes, it was such a great gift to hear this is a genetic deletion, not a genetic defect. Because once you call someone defective, once you talk about a birth defect, you're likening a human to an item on a factory line. I mean, it's a very post-industrial revolution way of thinking about a human person. Like the cleft palate being the defect, or, it's like, oh, send this machine back. We're humans, we're not machines, and we're not mistakes. And there's everything about us is an expression of, in my own spirituality, an expression of the divine. And you don't have to, you could be atheist and still feel, see the inherent goodness of being human. So that's what I mean about the flexible reality, that like, depending on who's framing the story, it explodes or shuts down so much. And the language is a way of indicating or conveying what that frame is.
And shaping the imagination about the future. And
Yeah.
you do a great job of writing about this too. And you've even spoken to it already today, that sense that, okay, it is not that Fiona is valuable because she is walking and talking.
Yeah.
At the same time, having a doctor come in and say she's never going to walk, she's never going to talk, and her life is therefore miserable, and so is yours. Like,
yeah.
And so it isn't the message of she's going to walk, she's going to talk. Like, it's not just
Yeah.
we just need a cheerleader, but
Right.
someone who says her life is valuable
Yeah.
and meaningful. And you as a parent get to participate in the unfolding development of that, however she gets to express herself.
Yes.
Um, and
Yes. So well said. Thank you
yeah,
for,
well, sure. I mean, again, I've thought about these things myself a
yeah.
lot, not just as it relates to Penny, but as it relates to all sorts of people who
Mm-hmm.
are expressing themselves and the ways in which we were all given different bodies and different ways of being, which actually leads me to my next question. So, one of the things that my husband Peter said early on in Penny's life was that disability was like a magnifying glass. Like, it was
Mm-hmm.
like a way to see humanity more clearly
Mm-hmm.
because her vulnerabilities and limitations were more clear in the world's eyes than ours were. And yet it was like, oh, I have that too. Like, that's also true of me, but I couldn't see it until I could see it in her. And similarly, her giftedness and beauty and kind of the wonder that I experience in knowing her, well, gosh, what if that's true for me as well? So we've kind of talked about disability as like a magnifying glass. And
Mm-hmm.
I was, and I think about this a lot because on the one hand, I feel like we have this experience that is very different than that of other families, right?
Yeah.
Like, throughout the milestones early on, and
Yeah.
I knew the road to the children's hospital by heart, and, just had all sorts of things as a part of my life that none of my friends did in raising their typical kids.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, I feel like it's really important to talk about the shared and common humanity
Yeah.
of our children and ourselves. And you write about this kind of temptation to compare, and also almost like a temptation to put yourself in a different category. What does it mean to be similar? What does it mean to be different? How do we think about those things? So I'm just curious to hear what you would say about, yeah, how do you think about comparisons as a parent, and kind of from person to person and child to child within this framework of a different experience of our
Yeah.
common humanity?
Yeah. Whew. I don't know. I think one thing I thought of as you were asking that is this idea, and this might not be connected, but I think it is. This idea that I do think that there are two kinds of parents. It seems like in my world, like when I meet other parents who have kids with some kind of neurodivergence or disability, there's the parent who's still striving for normal, for like what normal could look like, or for passing, even, like trying to catch the kid up, or move them along to be in this sort of trajectory of what we think of as like the American dream life, or the whatever it is, the traditional grown up pattern or trajectory. And then there's the parent who's totally given that up, often because of like they've had to. And I always find greater comfort in the second company, the person who's like, oh yeah, normal, we're done with that. I don't know what's going to happen, and who lets go of the yardsticks that the culture uses for success. I think that's a little different than what you're saying, but I still find it that those categories are helpful. I mean, we don't parent kids that are similar to typically developing kids in many ways, and yet they have all of the like the rights to belong, the rights to community, the rights for the need for friendship, the need for being seen for who they are and how they're valuable in a community, and offering what they have what they have that's valuable. Whether that's for Fiona, she went through a phase where she really liked pushing heavy objects, as heavy as she could. She's 30 pounds now, pushing things around the room. So during like a meeting with her general ed teacher, the teacher watched Fiona push like chairs around, and he was like, oh, hey, that's really interesting. I've never seen her do that. I'm like, well, she loves, if you want furniture moved, she loves to do it, like, because she was in an inclusive setting at that point. So how can she be able to to be like appreciated and valued for her? I think all of that is like an essential requirement for kids across abilities,
Right. And that's where it goes back to that sense of commonality, even if that's going to be expressed in a different way because of her particular bodies and abilities,
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
doesn't mean that there's not a common need to belong, as you said. This is taking a different tack, but I would love to speak a little bit about the spirituality that you express in the book. And it's really an interesting story because you have this pretty broad experience, at least within Christianity, right? In terms of both
Yeah.
a more conservative or fundamentalist evangelical background, as well as being a part of a progressive wing of the church
Yeah.
in different ways. And I'm wondering if you can just share a little bit of your story there, but also how Fiona's presence in your life has, whether it's prompted questions or conclusions or, thoughts, experiences, doubts, like how she's affected you when it comes to your spiritual growth.
Yeah, I mean, so Fiona, I always had a hard time. I got baptized late in life because I was raised Baptist, and I had so they didn't, baptize in infancy. Yeah. So I had the freedom to walk away from the church and then return. And so I was baptized, I think I was 30. And in my catechumenate sessions, we read Genesis. And there's this passage, there's the part where humans are made in the image of God. And in my little group, people talked about how consoling that was for, how comforting it was to hear that we're all made in the image of God. And I didn't understand that at all. This was 13 years ago. Okay. I thought that sounded like we assumed we were God, and I was like, well, isn't this the very justification for a lot of the harm on the planet?
It's gone really wrong.
Yeah. And so it didn't comfort me the same way. Other parts of Genesis, that passage in Genesis did, which I actually very briefly mentioned in the book.
I have a quotation from that in front of me. So yeah, we'll get there. But keep talking.
So it wasn't until I held Fiona and also held Fiona in the context of held this tiny baby in the context of other medical professionals indicating to me that in their perspective, she was wrong. At one point I mentioned the doctor who says, why is this baby so small? It's either bad seed or bad soil. In other words, she is a bad plant in his metaphor. And meanwhile, I'm holding this person who came from me, but not, and that's when I got a much clearer, she was my first child. I got a much a deeper, bone deep understanding of what it means to be made in the image of God. Because she was so beloved and not just beloved from me, by me, but just seemed so beloved, that I just felt much closer to what's that central Christian teaching. Yeah. And since then, since being her mother, I've continued to just better re-understand the Gospels, what it means to love one another, so all of that for me, has flourished. My Christian practice has flourished in tandem with being her mother.
Yeah, that's really, you get a sense of that in the book. I just, and I think you do some really interesting theological work, honestly, in terms of, there's a passage where you write about the God as a verb from the passage in Exodus where God says, I am that I am. And then the idea of love being the nature of God's essence and love being what fuels the universe, right? If God is love and that is an action, that's a verb, then what does that say about what it even means to be made in the image of God? I think that goes back to what you were saying before. The capacity to love is what makes us human, and to be loved, right? To give and receive love. And that all, ties together and ties in also. So that passage from Genesis 1 that you mentioned, so you're writing about the place where it says, God saw that it was good. And you say, I always remembered that as God declared that it was good, but it actually says God saw that it was good. And so then this is the quote I wrote down. When we perceive with the lenses of the divine, we see goodness. So I just wanted to hone in on that for a minute. What does it mean to perceive with the lenses of the divine? To see with God's eyes, and how's that worked out in your life? Obviously, well, I don't want to speak for you. I don't see with God's eyes all the time.
Right. No. I think that was partly in response to those doctors who were looking at Fiona and saying, this is wrong. This doesn't measure, this body of this baby doesn't measure up to our charts. It doesn't fall in the bell curve the way we like. That like comment, if you're looking at a human life, like a brand new human life, and you're going, this is wrong, something is off with your lens,
Yeah.
So I think it was a way for me to express, the importance of kind of seeing that inherent goodness in all life, in all humans. So an example of this, really mundane, would be today. I had to go to work for the first time. I teach. I'd like walk into a university room and sit with people, some wearing masks and some not, and have a discussion for the first time in a year and a half. So I was a little anxious because I taught virtually all last year. And Petra, my other daughter, who's 2 years younger than Fiona, is in the room, and she's brainstorming about something and just curious about something and has all of these ideas. And I'm all in my head, and I can feel my body's tense, and I'm trying to listen and can't listen because in 20 minutes I need to leave for this first meeting in a year and a half in person. And I just sort of stopped myself and tried to get into my body and tried to look at her face and tried to see how beautiful she was. That she was one of the most beautiful things, or not things, but beautiful people, beautiful encounters that in my life. And I'm all in my body, all anxious and like sort of distracted. So that's a moment where it's like, just look at your daughter's face. Just look at her delight and her enthusiasm about this thing that she's inventing in her imagination. Can you see that this is good right now? This is good right now. So I think that's a moment. It's a real simple, like mundane moment of trying to see with those lenses.
Yeah. And just I have been thinking a lot about the ordinariness of love and grace. And we live in this world where there's so much that is spectacular, like the iPhone, and, it's all glitzy and candy. It's all like sugar rushed. I mean, actual.
Yes. Yes. Dopamine hits all around.
Yes. And, and I've just been thinking about the need for the ordinary, including what is actually quite miraculous, I think: ordinary love, ordinary seeing, ordinary beauty, ordinary people. And that's just a moment of like ordinary grace, right? There's nothing, I mean, I looked at my daughter, and yet what was that? That was like going back to Genesis 1, like, and I saw that she was good, and that changes the world, right? So that's beautiful. Well, I wanted to end just by asking you, the name of this podcast is Love is Stronger Than Fear, which is a phrase I guess I landed on at some point in being Penny's mom, and having so much fear, especially when it came to her future. And I think I was told to have that fear. That's part of that framing, right? That narrative framing of like what's going to go wrong with your child, which you don't get for your typical kids. And there's to go wrong for them too, right? But so it's like, be very afraid to be her mom. And yet at the same time, and I think this is similar to you, like holding this baby and being like, do you see her? Like, and so there was also just this sense of, but if I just love her right now, it's not that the fear is like absolutely gone, but the love is more powerful than that fear. Like the fear does retreat to the corners and the love does come out. And I've started to think about how that might be possible, not just in my experience with Penny. I've seen that again and again and again, but how that might be possible in my experience of even a scary world. And so I just wonder about your own thoughts on choosing to love instead of choosing fear, in how fear might prevent us from loving and how love might overcome fear. Like any of those thoughts, which again come up in your book.
That's all really good stuff. Those are great questions. Well, first of all, I mean, one of the most common phrase that Jesus says, other than like "very truly I tell you," is which he loves, is be not afraid, right? I mean, we're constantly. So what that tells us is that the human person is pretty well wired to be afraid.
Yeah.
and that there's a desire from our source to calm that. Like there's, to say, okay, can you set that down? I know that your adrenal glands are designed for some, all that stuff, but okay, be not afraid. Be not afraid. So I think about that comfortingly. I also think fear is an opportunity for us to practice faith. I've been thinking about that, like, and anxiety especially, like, oh, I'm incredibly anxious about something. That's an opportunity to surrender, to trust, to believe that, that grace, it could be around the corner. But man, yeah, fear could absolutely eclipse love. And I felt that in my body when Fiona was early on. Some parents talk about like the euphoria of early motherhood, and some don't, regardless of how their children, what kind of babies they have. But I definitely felt this. There was a lot of messaging about fear early on for her. I talked about how, like, on the whiteboard of the delivery room, the agenda for me was rest. That's what they wrote. Like, what should you do today? Rest. But that was clearly not the messaging I was getting from everyone who was really concerned about her size. There was a sense of like, I really needed to step up and be afraid about her tininess. But deep down, there was still this, like, I think that's why Fiona has really helped my Christian practice, because I've actually experienced the Holy Spirit much more than I think I ever have. I experienced this quiet voice that said, she's fine. She's fine. And it's very hard to trust that in the noise of be afraid, be very afraid.
Right.
And there's still,
yeah.
Yeah, and there's also still legitimate, people need nutrition, and babies with Wolf-Hirschhorn syndrome have a hard time receiving it. There's still like some very practical things to tend to. But I have found somewhere deep in the base of me a voice that says, this is okay, or this is, you're okay. This sort of comfort that I started experiencing in those dark, like late nights of nursing in her early months, or late, like first year. And gosh, that really, that can get a person through. That doesn't mean that most of the thoughts are peace and comfort in those times of tumult. It might just be you get a flash of that for a second on a day, a flash of peace, and like a kind of a clearly steered ship. And then everything around you is storm, but that's okay. That can take you pretty far, I think.
I agree. And I think even just thinking just how many times in the Bible, whether that's in the Old Testament, where someone protests and says, I can't do what you're asking me to. And God says, do not be afraid. I will be with you. And doesn't say, you're fantastic.
Yes.
With you. And I think similarly, when Jesus keeps saying, do not be afraid, it's not because you can conquer the world as this independent superwoman, right? It's actually, do not be afraid, I'm with you.
Yeah.
And essentially, I think going back to that capacity to love, and if we can, in our fits and starts, and just that like little glimpse or moment in the midst of the storms of every day, if we can begin to trust and love more than fear, and not like, I mean, we have a capacity to love, but I think it's ultimately trusting in like the love that is underneath it all, as you were saying, space, and like tapping into that so that it can actually fill us and then equip us to be choosing love towards others. That again, it goes back to making us more vulnerable. But also, I think, I've often said, Penny broke my heart wide open.
Yeah.
Like, that there was a breaking that had to happen. But then once it did, it was like, whoa, there's just a lot of love that not just I can give, but much more so that I need and want to receive if I'm able, willing, forced into that brokenness.
Yes. So well said.
Well, thanks. Well, Heather, thank you for your book. Thank you for your time.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. I will say I will keep it and read it again because it's just really beautiful and there's a lot of truth contained in it. And it's just wonderful to read. That's, I guess for me, it's as much that sense of, our kids do not have the same diagnoses, but that sense of there's a deeper truth running through this universe that we are in, and it shows up in these vulnerable places. I think that's part of what I felt so connected to, was just that sense of like, this is, she's just writing about truth and beauty and goodness, and sure, through the lens of being the mother of a child with an unexpected diagnosis and figuring out what it means to love in the midst of that. But there's also something that is, there's like a uniqueness to your story, of course, and there's also a universal nature to it. And
thanks.
Really grateful to get to read it and talk to you.
Yeah, this was a delight. I enjoyed talking too.
Thank you. Thanks so much for listening to Love is Stronger Than Fear. We will be back in 2 weeks with a conversation with Dominique Gilliard about his new book, Subversive Witness: Scripture's Call to Leverage Privilege. Meanwhile, I would love to ask you to share this episode, subscribe to this podcast if you haven't already, and of course, it's always helpful to give it a rating or review wherever you find your podcasts, because that allows other people to find this show and benefit from these conversations. Thank you also, Jake Hansen, for editing, Amber Beery, my social media coordinator. She does more to support this show than anyone will ever know, and I am so grateful for her. And finally, as you go into your day today, I hope you will carry with you the peace that comes from believing that love is stronger than fear.